Okay, so with the propeller, one thing you have to look out for on the TBM, as you can see, it's a very big prop. It's a large prop. But one thing that you have to look out for is, as you can see here, it's approximately sitting at about 10 inches off the ground, right? So the tip of the blade is about 10 inches off the ground. So you can imagine when the propeller is spinning and it's creating thrust, um, it will pull the nose of the aircraft down a little bit, which will bring the prop even closer to the ground. So one thing you really got to look out for is as you're taxiing, you got to make sure that you're not taxiing in an area that has tall blades of grass, maybe deep snow, or even small rocks or pebbles on the runway or the taxiway. Because if you do, it's very, very easy to chip the prop or get a prop strike in this aircraft. So with that in mind, you can imagine your landing has to be very careful as well. You got to be very careful in your landing because in this aircraft, if you land flat, right? So that means if you land on the mains and your nose wheel at the same time, and you have all that weight coming down, it's very, very easy to compress the shocks, right? Which would then even further lower or decrease this distance between the tip of the propeller and the ground. So it's not uncommon to have a prop strike in this airplane on landing, just from landing, with an improper landing technique. So landing flat or slightly nose wheel first will probably guarantee a prop strike. So you've got to be very, very careful with this aircraft on landing. There's a few tips and stabilized approach criteria to meet in order to avoid that scenario, but you really got to be careful about that. And that's one thing I really had to learn and pay attention to early on when transitioning from the Meridian to the TBM, because the Meridian has a much greater distance between the surface of the ground and the propeller. So one thing to keep in mind there for sure. Okay, so we just had a look at the propeller and what to look out for there. Let's take a look at the landing gear. And this is another gotcha with the plane. So it's a very strong landing gear, very beefy, and compared to the Meridian, the strut is much larger. But there's still something to look out for here. So what you'll see is with the landing gear door is made up of two pieces. So you have this outer piece here, and then this inner piece, this inner door. The outer door is quite tall. I'd say about 10 inches from the ground. But you have this inner door here that's maybe 4 inches off the ground. So say you came in from a long flight, you landed, and you're very low on fuel. There's not a lot of weight in the aircraft. Now you're light. So the ramp agent comes and puts the chocks under your wheels, and they don't know this about TBMs. They may put the chalk under the wheel, and part of it may go under this inner fairing right here. And as you can see, there's not a large gap here between the chalk and the fairing. So say you go inside the FBO and you say, hey, yes, add this much fuel, maybe top it off. Now you're going to add a lot of weight to the aircraft. And as you add the weight, the aircraft will settle and push this inner fairing into your chalk. And it will damage this piece here. It's a very expensive piece to replace. So wherever you're going, you want to make sure that the ramp agents, when they're using chocks, place the chalk away from and inside from that fairing so you don't crush it as they refuel the aircraft. Let's take a look here at another item that is a high wear item in this airplane. So the brakes. The brakes in this airplane are very powerful. It's a multi-disc, multi-clutch type, multi-disc, multi-pad type setup. So they're very powerful, but they also can wear out pretty quickly. Remember, this can be a almost 7,400 pound aircraft, so there's a lot of weight to stop. But with this aircraft, the brakes are also very, very expensive to replace. So while you can land this aircraft in very short strips, we tend to select airports that have longer runways if we can, and avoid some of the smaller airports. That way we don't have to use the brakes. We can utilize the reverse propeller and longer runways to minimize our brake usage because that is a very high wear item. And when it does go, it is very, very expensive.